4. Everybody's talking, no one says a word. Everybody's making love, no one really cares. There's napkins in the bathroom, just below the stairs. Always something happening, nothing going on. There's always something cooking, nothing in the pot. They're starving back in China, so finish what you got.
That actually, later in that song, Lennon mentions UFOs. But I think the thrust of the beginning of that song is closer to the spirit of this show. And before I get going, maybe I'll just say a little something to you public radio listeners out there. Public radio listeners often are the first to rebel against anything that they feel sounds irrational. I would just say this about what we're going to be talking about for the next hour. You know, if you really sat down and made a list of all the anomalous things that have happened to you in your life, moments where you experienced a powerful sense of deja vu, moments where you experienced a coincidence that just seemed impossible, moments where you saw something that you couldn't reconcile with your ideas of reality. All of those kinds of things. You know, William James would call those weird facts. I think all of us have some kind of portfolio of those, and we don't necessarily bring them to the front of our consciousness because, in fact, to deal with them, we had to park them somewhere. But they're there. I think most people, if you could get them to be honest and get them to do kind of an inventory, which is hard to do for the reason I just said, they would agree, or they would at least be forced to share with you the fact that, yes, they've got a little list of those kinds of things. All right. So today on the show, we have two guests. The more that we worked on this is the third day of Astronauty Week. The more that we worked on this, the more we saw a lot of commonalities between these two guests. So we're going to start with Diana Walsh Pasulka. She's been with us before, professor of religion at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and the author of American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, and Technology, which is, I think, the book that brought her to us the first time. Her new book is Encounters, Experiences with Nonhuman Intelligences. Later in the show, we're very excited to have Carlos Eire, a professor of history and religious studies at Yale University. His new book is They Flew, A History of the Impossible. And this is very specifically focused on on a lot of the miraculous happenings that were taking place more or less on the bleeding edge of the Enlightenment. But let's begin with Diana. We're very excited to have you back, Diana Walsh Pasulka. And we should also say, apropos of Astronauty Week, that just to honor us, I think astronomers have announced today they've discovered a six-pack of planets formed at least 4 billion years ago and remarkably unchanged since, orbiting a nearby sun-like star. So it never stops. So Diana Walsh Pasulka, if I had to describe your new book to somebody, here's how I would describe it, and then you can tell me that I'm right or wrong or elaborate one way or the other.
Okay.
I would say you're kind of running your thumb down the knife's edge between non-human encounters or experiences with possible extraterrestrial life forms or other, and revelation or epiphany. The two have a lot in common, and the more that I get into your book, the more I keep thinking, well, they have a lot in common in some cases. What we think of as an epiphany and what we think of as an inexplicable encounter with a possible alien life form might be very, very similar. But you should say more.
Okay, sure. First thing I'm going to say is I am a public radio listener. So
you know who I mean, though. You know who I mean.
Yeah, I do. Okay, I think you mean my mother, actually. Mm-hmm. But so you suggested that it's a combination of revelation and again, what's the next word you use to describe it?
Epiphany, and not a combination, but there's kind of a thin line between what we think of as a religious epiphany and what we think of as a maybe an encounter with a non-human intelligence.
Sure. Okay. Yes. So I would describe it that way, definitely, because in the first book, American Cosmic, which, by the way, is published by Oxford. So, it is an academic book, but it became popular because I guess the timing was pretty amazing. So because we're talking about UFOs in Congress at the moment. So I would say that in the first book, what I proposed to do was to document what I describe as a new form of religion, not just UFO religion, because we do have UFO religions, but a new form of religiosity, spirituality, the focus of which is the UFO. And so the second book, Encounters, is then a deep dive into the people who have these experiences and how they came to these experiences and what they're experiencing. And to go back also to the NASA announcement that you made earlier, and the first two chapters are focused on a person who actually trains astronauts and pilots, and she's a space psychologist. So most people don't know that we do have psychologists who focus on the people who go into these extreme environments and prepare them for these extreme environments. And so it focuses on Dr. Ea Whiteley, who's at University College London. So, and she also talks about the experiences of astronauts and pilots who see what we now call UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And so, yes, I do think that this book it fits that it would be revelation, as that's what testimonies are, say, in the New Testament or the Hebrew Bible. We identify that as revelation, but in that time period, that was basically, those were just testimonies. So yeah, the book is basically a book of testimonies of people who have these experiences.
And before we even get to UAPs or anything like that, one point you make early on in the book is that astronauts, by the way, tomorrow's show is like all astronauts, against my better judgment, but that astronauts have what's sometimes called the overview effect. When they get out there in space, they look at Earth, and whether it's Edgar Mitchell, who really ultimately said the only real correlate he could find was more in religions like Hinduism and Buddhism to the kind of experiences that he was having. Rusty Schweigert and the non-astronaut, but astronaut William Shatner, who went up recently with Bezos and came back and just described weeping, at this different perspective that he had. And different perspective just seems almost like an understatement, right? You get out there and there is a whole kind of reordering of your sense of your relationship to the universe. I mean, I'm saying you, but I'm meaning astronauts, right?
Yes, absolutely. That definitely happened. And, the training of astronauts has changed, of course, because now we have simulations. So astronauts so what the early astronauts experienced was something like this overview effect, but even something deeper than that William Shatner, actually, AKA Captain Kirk, experienced. And, for him, it was really disorienting, and it verged on horrific, right? So he came back to Earth, and he had to gather himself before he could actually give any public statements about it. But he did. He wept. And so there are experiences that are very extreme when people do leave Earth and venture into space. And the best of those is called the overview effect, which is captured by that famous photograph, Earthrise, right, from the Earth rising, taken from space. And a lot of people think that this experience now can be communicated to people like me who have never been in space, like ordinary people. But a lot of the astronauts say that can't happen. But what's happening is the people who actually train the astronauts are now taking that information that they got, and they're now putting it into virtual reality so that the astronauts can be prepared when they get there for these extreme experiences.
One of the things that I thought reading the previous book and reading this book, I will now make a prediction. I will now demonstrate my precognition abilities. One of your next 3 books will be about near-death experiences, because there just are a lot of commonalities there, too, including, and I'll have you elaborate on this, the people who've had near-death experiences they come back and they are often profoundly changed, so changed that they're almost dysfunctional within the normal rubric of society. Sometimes they're just so altruistic that they've got to help everybody and they've got to love everybody just as much as they love their own wife and kids. And that's something that also seems to happen to contactees, right?
Yes, definitely. And by the way, I have studied near-death experiences. So Leslie Kean has written about them, and I think I would have written about them by now. But I did do a look at what is called otherworld journeys in the medieval time period. It was, when people left their body or they died and came back, which was rarer then because they didn't have the technology, the medical technologies that we have today. But yeah, so what we see is a reorientation of value systems. So people actually, when they have these experiences, they do get completely shifted or changed and definitely become, I guess, altruistic would be a good word to describe it.
One of the other things actually, let's do it this way. One of the points that you make is that when people have an encounter, usually either we never hear about it because there's stigma attached to it, or it's mediated, as you would say, through, government agencies or journalists like me. In other words, we put the story into some kind of context that works for us. And that one of your goals and one of the goals of some of the other researchers you admire, like Jacques Vallée, is to go directly to the witnesses, see if you can get testimony or understand them in a way that's unsullied and uncompromised by outside agencies. Could you say a little bit more about that and how that worked out for you? Yeah,
sure. So what I found was that when I started to talk to people who were having experiences that they associated with UFOs or UAPs, this seemed a lot like what I had done when I was looking at miraculous events in the Catholic tradition. And so what I found was that, let's take Teresa of Avila. She's a nun, a Spanish nun from the 1500s, and her experiences with a quote unquote angel are very well represented. So you can, Google search her and see her, experiences represented. What I found was that, she actually wrote about her own experiences in her diary. And what she said about her experiences looked very different than how they were represented in artwork. And so what we see is this kind of what we call processes of redaction, which are changes and edits, right? And so I found that to be the case in especially redaction is a big word in communities of ufology because the CIA redacts a lot of documents that have to do with UFOs. So I found the similarity and I thought it was ironic, but actually very appropriate. So yes, these experiences, unless you're talking to people who actually had the experiences, they often get changed, and they also get changed through popular culture. So, there are, what a lot of people actually know about UFOs, they've seen through like documentaries and things like that. But this is all entertainment. A lot of what we see about UFOs is entertainment media. So we're getting a lot of this information that's been filtered through, what's going to sell, what's going to bring eyes to, these, posts, say, on social media. But rarely do we get the people who are just talking about what they experienced. And so that's what I hope to do in Encounters, was just give you this experience, obviously mediated through me, but as much as possible, letting these people talk for themselves.
Right. First of all, when Carlos joins us, he's going to use the term bracketing, which is, I think, related to your ideas about redacting. But we have to take a little break here. We're going to come back. We're going to have more of Diana Walsh Pasulka, and then we'll have Carlos Eire join her, the two of them. They're going to have the most wonderful time together. You're already talking about stuff that Carlos is interested in. All right, here we go.
Suddenly I'm up on top of the world. It should have been somebody else. Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so free. Flying away on a wing and a prayer. Who could it be? Believe it or not, it's just me.
That song, by the way, that could be the theme song for Carlos Eire's book, They Flew. But we're coming to that in the next segment. Right now, we're with Diana Pasulka. Encounters, experiences with non-human intelligences, explorations with UFOs, dreams, angels, AI, and other dimensions. So, Diana, to that point, often when UFO encounters, alien encounters are reported back through the press, even by people who really want to grant the premise of them, or at least get us interested in the premise of them, they're often just the people who have had these encounters. They're almost invariably described as, he's an engineer and he didn't believe in UFOs and he doesn't believe in anything else and he's really, really rational, but he saw this thing. And that's not entirely what you discovered talking to these people. You talk about them being kind of initiated into a new life, one, as you say, characterized by vivid and lucid dreams, altered states of reality, the presence of UFOs and supernatural beings like angels, as well as a presence of a network of information that many experiencers believe they can access. That, a lot of your people, like there's a guy named Jose, there's a guy named Len, they're interested in a lot of things besides just whether somebody came here from another galaxy.
Yes, they are. Absolutely. So that's the thing, is that when I began to study this, which was in 2012, I was surprised by a lot of what I found. And the one thing I found was that when people would have these experiences, the experiences were accompanied by all these contexts, right? So there's their life contexts, and they would see things other than just what we would term UFOs. And the UFOs, by the way, wouldn't look like what we, stereotypically think they look like. And they would have these experiences. And so when I wrote the other book, we decided, at my editor and I, to call it, experiences with non-human intelligence. But then he said, Diana, I think we have to be really explicit that all these things occur. And I said, I think that's a really long title. I'm not sure that, but he said, but it's accurate. And I said, okay, might as well just make it accurate. So so these people, they will see a UFO, and then a lot of other things will happen to them. And personally, as a person who does research in this, I thought I should include everything else in the context of the experiences, because these are not just usually one-off events. These are events that occur within a life where people are having these changes and they're adapting to these changes.
So Jung, as you know, was interested in UFOs, and sometimes he seemed to take them pretty seriously as real possibilities, and sometimes he seemed to kind of more incorporate them into his thinking about the rest of life. But I was thinking a lot about Jung reading your book, and specifically, I'll give you a specific example. And this is sort of something, me pushing in a little bit at one of these stories. So there's a scientist in your book. You call him the gray man because he doesn't want anybody to know who he is. And he has one of the first things you describe. He has this experience where he is awakened from sleep, and he's kind of encountering this being who is initially scary and then the opposite of that. And he has a lot of the symbolology, this being, that we would associate with the Archangel Michael. But the gray man has no familiarity with the Archangel Michael. There's no reason why he would conjure up a vision of that, because it's not anywhere in his experience. Although, and correct me, I might not even have this right, but the way that I think about Jung would say, well, no, he doesn't need to. That's an archetype. We carry around these archetypes, part of our collective subconscious. So you can have a dream about a manticore, even if you don't know what a manticore is. And you can have a dream about the Archangel Michael because he's there, whether you ever saw him in a painting or read a book about him or not. What's your response to that?
Oh, yes, I definitely saw. Well, there were a lot of things I saw in the symbolism of what he was describing to me. And of course, a Jungian archetype is one way we could describe it. And I also found that the being that this, kind of light being with a sword actually is pre-Christian as well. So, it's kind of this irony or coincidence. But last week, I was at the Soul Conference, which was the inaugural conference at Stanford for the Soul Foundation, which is, a group of scientists who study UFOs and UAPs. And they named their organization after Sol Invictus, which is the sun god of Roman mythology, pre-Christian. And so, and the iconography is exactly like Saint Michael. You have this beautiful being that looks like a soldier, has it's fighting what looks like a dragon or a demon, and it has a sword. So I guess I would respond to you. I mean, of course, those, I did an analysis of Carl Jung's ideas of UFOs in American Cosmic. I didn't really want to reduce these to our normal constructs, because I thought that it would be best just to describe them, because, it would just be another way to say we don't really know what an archetype is either. So you see what I'm saying? So I want to kind of push that. And I did know that. It's also very there's some very Freudian overtones to his vision of Saint Michael as well. And I knew people would pick that up, but I didn't actually want to talk about that in my book for the reasons that it's just another theory about what it could be.
So, we're spending this entire week talking about things related to this theme. And one of the stories, or one of the reports that you deal with in this book is one that really intrigued me, just because of the way that it was processed by the kind of the first and second and third responders to it. And it's the Brockport, New York UFO in 1967. I'll let you tell a little bit of that story, but I know one of the things you'll want to talk about is that some versions of the story seem to have more credibility than others, just because of the way they were narrated. But I'm not doing as good a job as you will of anyway, just sort of give people the bare bones of the story first.
Yes, sure. So one of the people I feature in the book is Len, and he was a young teenager during the 60s, the 1960s, and he experienced a UFO flap, which is a series of UFOs that are seen over a fairly small geographical area in upstate New York. And this was in Brockport. And what fascinated me about, first, Len was really fascinating in and of himself, because he also had some one would call it archetypal visions. But this experience in particular was interesting because it was well documented at the time and studied by NICAP, which is a UFO research group that existed back then. And it was seen by over 30 people, so many credible witnesses. And I'll talk about the credible witness idea in a minute. But what was fascinating was that the first person to see the Brockport UFO was a security guard named Zipkin. I can't remember his first name. So he sees this, but he sees it as and by the way, this is going to be a pattern in almost all UFO reports. You're going to have people see the same thing, but see different things. Okay, so I want to stress that for your listeners. Okay, so he sees a craft pull down into the parking lot where he's the night watchman, and then he sees these little people get out of the craft, little people like 3 feet tall, and run around and then get back into the craft and leave. And he's the first one to make the report. And he makes the report, and of course, everybody at the police station is laughing at him, right? Because it sounds so ridiculous. So his report is made, but then after that, reports come in, but they don't see a craft, and they don't see little men or little people. What they do see is the kind of Steven Spielberg, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, beautiful looking craft. And that comes in, and everybody treats those reports as actually credible, but they discount the first report, which is Zipkin's report. And Len, the person I feature in the book, he's a teenager, and he's having a sleepover at his friend's house in their backyard. And he and his friends see this same kind of UFO, but they don't see it as a craft. It's this really amazing, beautiful light show that goes slowly over them. And so most of the people see that, but the people who do the research of this, the the NICAP researchers, they throw out Zipkin's report because it's ridiculous, but they keep all the other reports instead. So I thought I needed to include Zipkin's report because seriously, when you do look at these things, a lot of people will see things, and then some people will see the same thing but see it differently. So I needed to include that because, it is data.
Right. And so, by the way, Sidney Zipkin is his name.
That's right. Thank you.
So this is why I'm going to circle back to NDEs. One of the arguments that's kind of leveled against the validity of near-death experiences is that Hindus tend to have Hindu NDEs and Christians tend to have Christian NDEs, et cetera, et cetera. So how can that be when God standardized all these things? Although I think what you think about Brockport is what I think could be possible about NDEs too. I mean, back to William James, he would say pure experience is something that none of us is capable of processing. Humans don't have that capacity. We use constructs that allow us to just, to get sort of look through two long straws into pure experience and see whatever it is that we can see. And so, yeah, we're going to experience things kind of the way we're wired in the way that we're taught. I assume that's how you would interpret the kind of differentiated versions of the same UFO.
Absolutely. So William James, of course, was, Kantian. He had some Kantian overtones. So Immanuel Kant, one of the most amazing philosophers of Western history, proposes that we have faculties and that we can't know, we're human beings in space time. And actually this is being, Kant is being validated through basically quantum physics today that suggests that, who is the person who just said this? That space-time is a headset that we wear, right? Mm-hmm. So that would explain why, when we're looking at something that's perhaps, something maybe extraterrestrial, but maybe from, some other dimension or something, that we are looking at something that we all see in various ways. So, of course, that would include near-death experiences too, and the variation in near-death experiences.
So let me go back to Len, one of the guys in the Brockport story, kind of the protagonist in your Brockport story. He says to you, over the years, I've experienced a well-documented UFO sighting, an intense inner vision of a Catholic priest on the night he died, a poltergeist with other witnesses, a full chakra kundalini electric shock wave while chanting, a deep recognition of past life, various super vivid dreams, particularly concerning death, and exposure to a luminous, numinous white light that led to a sincere spiritual investigation and ultimate personal transformation. So we're back to that earlier point, which is there are a lot of people who don't just see a UFO.
Right.
They get a lot of other stuff going on. Now,
right.
A certain percentage of people hearing that are going to say, oh, so he's a cuckoo bird. And so how do you answer that? I mean, for some people, the UFO sighting would maybe raise their eyebrows. But if you add all the other stuff, they're going to say, oh, well, he's totally unhinged. What's the response to that?
Okay, first let me go back, and this will actually lead into Carlos's, hopefully, connections here, because I'm trained in Catholic history. So one of the documents that I looked at the Vatican archive when I was there, and that I actually have and have had translated, is the records of Saint Joseph of Cupertino.
Okay, don't do too much. Yeah, don't do too much Saint Joseph till Carlos gets here, because that's one of the two that we're really going to do. I'll just do this one part of that document, which is that the first 30 pages of it or so is basically they had the same problem back in that time period, which was when he flew. Nobody, the Catholic Church didn't necessarily believe it. So what they did was they had to go out and they had to get what are called credible witnesses. And we still have that problem. So when people say about Len, well, he's, like you just suggested, perhaps not rational, but that's actually just not true. Because as I showed in American Cosmic, the people that I feature in the book are not just credible witnesses, but they're incredibly successful. And many of them are at the absolute top of their academic game, like, Dr. E.O. Whiteley, Dr. Gary Nolan, who's at Stanford,
These are people who are beyond rational. They're actually innovative scientists. So there is this idea that we do establish credibility with a lot of the witnesses, and that was the problem with Sidney Zipkin, was that they didn't think that was credible. He was a night watchman. That's somewhat credible, but he himself, that was a weird thing to report. But when you report something that looks kind of cool and possibly, other people saw it, then you're like, okay. And then when the people, they always say, okay, was this a school teacher who saw it? Was it a person who's a trained observer, like a police officer? So they're always suggesting, okay, these are credible witnesses. This person was an astronaut. They saw this, they called it a UFO. So they always suggest the credibility of the witness. So I also spend time talking about the credibility of all of the people that I feature.
So we're going to take a break here. Diana Walsh Pasulka is going to come back, and Carlos Eire is going to join us to talk about the flu, a history of the impossible.
Reserve Marines coming in. DC, stop. Teen in Texas, stop. The grayish blue flying saucer, we flowing. The highway that night, the orange beam coming down was right. Truck stop, not a myth. Remember that light. The orange beam, not a myth. Remember that light. Observation, not a myth. Remember that light. You've been abducted by yes.
And our technical producer today is Kat Pastor, senior producer of the Colin McEnroe Show and the inventor of Astronauty Week. Although actually I technically did coin the name, but the creator of Astronauty Week is Lily Tyson, and she's the producer of this particular episode. Also thanks to Mr. Karp. Mr. Karp is the reason that I even know about Carlos Eire. Carlos Eire is joining us. Carlos Eire is a professor of history and religious studies at Yale University, won the National Book Award in 2003 for his memoir, Waiting for the Snow in Havana. His new book is They Flew, A History of the Impossible, and he joins us now. Carlos Eire, welcome to our conversation.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me to join.
So this is first of all, a very beautiful book, and it's a very scholarly study of these miraculous things, these impossible things, particularly levitation and bilocation, kind of 18th, 17th centuries. And I discovered that one of the things that inspired you, get ready, Kat, for C1. I discovered that one of the things that inspired you to write this book, oddly enough, was this.
We should be dead, man.
I know, we was lucky.
No. That's luck.
Yeah, maybe.
This was divine intervention. You know what divine intervention is?
I think so. That means that God came down from heaven and stopped the bullets?
That's right. That's exactly what it means. God came down from heaven and stopped these bullets.
I think it's time for us to leave, Jules.
Don't do that. Don't blow it off. What just happened here was a miracle.
Chill, Jules. It happens.
Wrong. This doesn't just happen.
Do you want to continue this theological discussion in a car or in a jailhouse with the cops?
We should be dead, my friend. What happened here was a miracle, and I want you to acknowledge it.
All right, it was a miracle. Can we go now?
Now, this, of course, was not two 17th century saints. These were two gangsters in Pulp Fiction, Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta.
Yes.
So tell us about the effect this had on you, Carlos.
Oh, well, I had been obsessed with impossible miracles before I watched this movie, but watching it made me realize that, my God, this is not some kind of arcane subject that no one might care about, but I realized that this very, very intelligent, deep discussion between these two gangsters just showed that most people, I won't say everyone, but most people are fascinated by the possibility of the miraculous. And it kind of gave me an impetus. It gave me a push to actually start working very seriously on this project, which ended up being the book.
Right. So now we're going to talk about St. Joseph of Cupertino, who Diana just brought up, sometimes referred to as the Flying Friar. Carlos, I have to just observe that there's two Cupertinos, and the other one is the home of the Apple campus, where, I think if you showed somebody even 100 years ago an iPhone, they would just go, okay, that's a miracle. That can't possibly exist.
There you go. There you go. And there's a connection because the stream after which Cupertino, California is named is the Spanish named the place after St. Joseph of Cupertino.
So tell us a little bit more about the Flying Friar.
Flying Friar was born in 1603, died in 1663. It's a 60-year span of life, during most of which he was repeatedly seen hovering and literally flying by hundreds, perhaps thousands of people in Italy. And he even rose above the head of Pope Urban VIII and Pope Urban, back to the witness issue. Yet you want a credible witness? The Pope reportedly said, if this man dies before I do, I will testify at his canonization inquest that he rose above my head. And he was seen by all sorts of nobles, titled nobles, very important people, including the Spanish viceroy in Italy. So the cloud of witnesses, as the Catholic Church sometimes likes to say, it's a cloud of witnesses, appropriate for somebody who literally flew. The cloud of witnesses is huge in the case of Joseph of Cupertino. And this is just one aspect of why I decided to focus on him. The other reason I decided Joseph Cupertino is anomalous, doesn't even cover it. He rose higher than anyone else, and he did so often outdoors. And in the 17th century, there was no way that anyone could fake this. And I should add that, much of my book is also devoted to people who were unmasked as frauds, who were actually faking these levitations and bilocations. The Catholic Church was very careful about documenting the genuine ones and sifting through and tossing out the fake ones. But levitating outdoors in the 17th century, there's no way you can rig up pulleys and ropes or even very thin cables. And the same goes for churches with very high ceilings, in which Joseph rose to the very top. So how does anyone explain the hundreds of testimonies?
Right. So there are going to be explanations. We should say more than 70 feats of levitation were reported at the inquest for Joseph of Cupertino. And one of the things that you say in your book is that, yes, there's a tendency to treat something like that as some kind of invention. I think that's the word that you use.
Right.
That's also, I think, something you refer to as bracketing. Explain bracketing.
Bracketing is the stance taken by most reputable scholars in our day and age, and dating back to the 19th century, where these strange phenomena are not studied as miraculous, but rather are studied as something that has been witnessed and of which we have reports. So the only fact you can look at is the reports, the testimonies. You cannot look at the event itself and make any judgments about it, whether it actually happened or not. So what you're left with is called in social scientific jargon is functionalism. You study the function of such things, what role these events play in a culture and society, either in small circles or larger. So you're only interested, and you can only talk about what purpose do these things serve.
Right. And so I'm going to bring Diana back in here. Diana, this is very similar, I think, to the kind of mediation and redaction that you're talking about. There's also, though, just an ethos within academia that's kind of what you should do. You shouldn't project any credibility onto impossible things. And maybe each of you, but let's start with you, Diana, how do you navigate that within the context of a job in academia?
Well, okay, so I think that, Carlos does an amazing and wonderful job of explaining what bracketing is. And it's always something that I do in every interview. As I say, in my field, we're not advocating belief. We're not advocating any particular religion. So in religious studies, this is what we do. We bracket. What happened to me when I started to study UFOs was I had to come up with a different methodology, because the impossible things that were being witnessed were also being identified objectively on radar, and also other equipment that we have, very sophisticated equipment that identifies UFOs and UAPs. So that's why it challenged my training, my graduate training.
Right. So now, Carlos, I'm going to have you sketch out your other favorite example, I think, and that would be Maria de Agreda. She was both a levitator and a bilocator, but you tell the story.
Well, Maria de Agreda began having mystical ecstasies very early in life. She was a nun who literally never left her house because when she was 15, her parents turned her house into a convent. So without ever leaving her house in Agreda, which is in a remote corner of Spain, she reportedly visited the Humano peoples in present-day New Mexico and West Texas over 500 times as a missionary, and communicated with them and taught them about the Christian religion. And actually, finding out that this was happening took a long time. But the key to it, the key that made everyone link Agreda and the Humano people was the fact that the Humanos kept coming to the Franciscan mission nearest to them, which was not all that close, and begging the Franciscan missionaries to baptize them. And when they asked, well, why should we baptize you? You don't know about our religion. And they said, no, this lady in blue has been telling us about it. And to this day, the lady in blue legend is still part of Southwestern American folklore. As a matter of fact, city of San Angelo, Texas, just erected a very large statue of Maria de Agreda 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, and so in the area of odd coincidences, weird facts, Diana, you actually visited the Vatican archives in pursuit of some information, I think I have this right, about why Joseph was beatified and Maria wasn't. We didn't know this before we scheduled the two of you on the same show together.
Uh-huh.
Yes, actually, it is kind of strange. And another thing is that Joseph of Cupertino is also the patron saint of astronauts, by the way.
So, Carlos, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Carlos.
And anyone who flies.
Yes, anyone who flies.
and also anyone who takes exams. He's the patron saint of exam takers.
And by the way, I learned a new word. Ethrobats, is that how I would pronounce it? It's
that's a word that 19th century spiritualists and theosophists preferred to use and then fell out of use. Trying to revive it.
It literally refers to walking on air. Back to that song we played a little while ago. But so, Carlos, let me try a functionalism argument out on you. So the period you're covering is kind of coterminous with the onset of the Enlightenment, the triumph, so to speak, of certain more rationalist interpretations of reality as opposed to supernatural ones. And I have this long-standing cultural theory that any kind of cultural phenomenon or trend revs up into high gear when it's facing extermination. And so a possible functionalist argument against, accepting these accounts would be people sensed a vanishing frontier. They sensed there was the triumph of the therapeutic, was what Philip Reeve eventually called it. But they sensed that this part of their lives was jeopardized by new trends in society. So they had maybe an unconscious incentive to believe even more passionately in miracles. So push back against that.
Well, there is no pushing back against that. I think it's a very reasonable argument, and I make it myself in the book, that in fact, why are the 16th and 17th century the peak period for flying people? Well, you've got two things going on. You've got, as you mentioned, growing rationalism and skepticism, but you also have the Protestant Reformation, and Protestants had denied the possibility of any such miracles. But it gets a little more complicated, because while Protestants denied that God performed any such miracles, they really believed that the devil did. And this is also the age of witchcraft persecutions. So these two things go together, the levitating and bilocating saints and the witches and the persecution of witches. And it is a pushback, but that against rationalism and, as you might say, a vanishing horizon. But that doesn't explain the fact that these phenomena have been recorded for centuries, before and after. So there might be a certain intensity to this time period that I'm focusing on, but that intensity is the anomaly, the intensity, not the phenomenon itself. The phenomenon didn't just begin to appear in the 16th century. It was there before, and it was there after, up to the present day.
So, Carlos, we're running out of time here, but 65% of Americans, in a Pew report in June 2021, 65% of Americans say their best guess is that intelligent life exists on other planets. And so if I were one of Diana's people who've had encounters, or at least somebody who said he'd seen a UFO, I'd probably have an easier time convincing people or not being adjudged a nutcase than if I made a report of levitation or certainly bilocation. So I don't know. You've only got about 90 seconds to explain why that would be the case, but I'd love to hear it.
Well, I've had people say I'm doing the history of the ridiculous or the history of the silly. Yeah, of course they're going to say that. All I'm saying is, if you want to be truly skeptical, you should be skeptical of dogmatic materialism. You should be skeptical about anyone who claims that there's only one dimension and this is it. Because, damn it, no, that can't be true. And there are many things that were once impossible or miracles, like an iPhone, and then later we discover that's not the case. But is there anything beyond material existence? That's where we come to the near-death experiences too, which I think are sort of the next step, the UAPs. Next step, I think you're absolutely right, near-death experiences. As a matter of fact, I'm giving a lecture on that today for my class.
Oh, I want to go to it. All right. I'll be on campus in the spring semester. I'm going to get to something. All right. We have to stop there. We're so fortunate to have with us today Diana Walsh Pasulka, professor of religion at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Her new book is Encounters, Experiences with Nonhuman Intelligences. Carlos Eire, professor of history and religious studies at Yale University. His new book is They Flew, A History of the Impossible. Thanks for listening. Tomorrow is Astronauts, and more to come after that.
All night, come on, dance with me. I'm levitating.